What's up, carpenters? So we're gonna do the baluster spacing, but we're gonna do it with an actual bunch of balusters and a 96-inch rail. We're gonna do the exact same process that I showed you on the other video, with the 4 steps, but we're gonna do it like with actual components. So you'll see exactly how this gets done and what the sort of the concept, the process for that is. Okay, so we're going to do this as a ride along. So plop you in here. Get you all locked up. Alright. So what I've got are a bunch of balusters, very short balusters. And I also cut these little spacers. So no more than a 4-inch gap. So what I did was I took 4 inches here, and then 1.5 inch baluster there. So this is 5 1/4, and I made 2 of them so I can put them end to end. Okay, so step 1, all right, I'm going to write this down here. Step 1, eliminate the gap. Sorry, eliminate 1 gap. Okay, and so for the beginning here, we're just going to assume that it's going to be a 1 4-inch gap way down here on the right side. All right, so step 2 is divide by 1 baluster, one baluster and 1 gap. Basically we're dividing by 5 1/4. All right, so 1 gap, 1 baluster is 5 1/4. You divide the total by that. All right, and I'll show you how I lay that out. We're going to lay it out a little different. It's actually going to be closer to multiplication, but you'll figure it out as we go. So step 3 is subtract the balusters from total run. So it's all the balusters we need. We're going to take all the balusters we need, and we're going to take the total run. We're going to take the balusters out, and that's going to leave us with the gap. Okay. Step 4 is divide. Let's divide the total gap by the number of gaps. So that language is a little different, but it's maybe a little clearer as to what we're doing. All right, so let's do this. Step 1, eliminate 1 gap. So 1 gap, all right, 1 gap is 4 inches, no more than 4 inches. So there's 3. I'm going to go tick, and I'm going to go bam, right? So this, and I'm doing it in pen so we can see. Normally I'd never write on wood in pen, but whatever. So eliminate 1 4-inch gap. All right, so now we're dealing with 96 inches less 4 inches, so that's 92. So from here down to there, other end is 92 inches. Okay, so step 2, divide by 1 baluster and 1 gap. So basically what we're doing is we're dividing 92 into even sections. So I got a gap and a baluster, and I'm just going to leapfrog this all the way down. Forgive me, this may take a minute because whoops, don't move that one, Dumbo. And this is going to be close but not perfect because obviously I'm sort of knocking these around a little bit. Alright, so we can do this. Okay, and we'll take these 2 balusters and put 1 there. Okay, so we're just leapfrogging these balusters all the way down. If this was my real job, I'd have some fancy pants music in the background. Maybe I'd speed it up so I worked really fast, but unfortunately I'm going to be low budget. Okay, so what this is doing, okay, what this information is going to provide for us is the number, why am I doing that, is the number of balusters and the number of gaps. Now when we did this with the math, we got 17.3 5.2 something or other, okay? So 17.52 means 17 holes, 0.5, which is some remainder, okay? So we should have 17 and another one, okay? So let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Right, so there's your 17 hole gap baluster combinations, plus this little remainder. Now obviously this little remainder is no good, right? Because that gives us an uneven spacing. But what we can do is we can take that 17.52 and round it up to 18. And now we're going to use 18, so we'll just use one more of these, and we'll shrink all these a little bit, and we'll be able to stick another baluster here on the end, and then we'll have even gaps. Okay, so what this just told us is that we have 18 balusters. Okay, we need 18 balusters, which gives us 19 gaps. So we'll even count the gaps just for kicks, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Okay, but we have 18 gaps, 17 balusters. If we go to 18 balusters, we're going to have 19 gaps. Those are the numbers we figured out here. Okay, so now what we'll do is, so we divided by one baluster, one gap. Okay, now we subtract all the balusters from the total run. Okay, so we need one extra baluster. Okay, and from the total run. So now we're going to put that 4 inches back on, because now we know that this 96-inch run is composed of 18 balusters and 19 gaps. Okay, so what we're going to do, basically, we're just going to multiply 1.25 inches by 19. Okay, so that is basically the same thing as stacking up 1.25 inches 18 times and measuring it all of it. Let's see, where did my tape measure go? Okay, so that is going to be 23. That's not what it's actually supposed to be. It's supposed to be 22.5. Now, we talked about cumulative error. If each of these, instead of 1.25 inches, is actually like even 1 inch and 5/16 or 1 inch and 9/32, right? If it's 1/32 off, if you add 1/32 19 times, you're over a 1/2 inch off. So this is off just a little bit, but you get the idea. 19 times 1.25 inches is that should actually be 22.5. So we should actually be back down here. So just for posterity, we'll go here. I'm going to mark this. We'll say these are balusters, and this is all the gaps. So my total baluster, if they were solid, would be here, and my total gaps would be down here. Okay. So now if we that's what we just did. We took these balusters and we subtracted it. Okay. Now we need to divide the total gap, which is from here down to the end that way. Divide the total gap by the number of gaps. So 96 is, well, yeah, 73.5. So 96 minus 22.5. 96 is the total, 22.5 is the balusters, equals 73.5. There's your total gaps. So my total gaps are 73. So we just take this and we divide it 19 times. Now I don't have, I can't take, here, there's my gap, I did that 19 times. We can actually do it with the math. And voila, what we get is 3 7/8. Okay? So let's see here, I actually made these. This is a gap baluster combination just like this gap baluster combination, except instead of a 4-inch gap, I used a 3 7/8 inch gap. Okay? So if you notice, this line, this baluster starts a little bit before that one. Okay? So these two gap balusters, if we do the same thing, this time we should be closer to right, all right? Let's make sure this starts off nice. I'll try to do this evenly. I want to do it this way. Flush and flush. Okay, the most important thing is that my spacers are right. Just like our conversations in class before this whole COVID-19 pandemic shutdown, right? We talked about cumulative error often. If I'm off a little bit on one baluster, no big deal. But if I'm off a little bit on every baluster, that is a big deal because it all adds up. Again, cue cartoon music and me speeding up. Okay. Now, in the real world, when I'm putting baluster sections together, I don't actually do it this way in terms of having a spacer block. I do the math. So if I know that from the beginning of my gap to the end of my baluster is actually 5 1/8, I just add 5 1/8 to 5 1/8 to get to 10 1/4 to get to my second one. So 5 1/8 would be here, 10 1/4 would be there, 15 3/8. Okay, I use the math that way. That way you can avoid the cumulative error. Okay, so we're going to be stacking these things. I hope we're pretty close. We might be a little bit wrong, but again, it's going to be that stacking issue. Even if my spacer blocks are off a 32nd of an inch, and I do this little piggyback or jump leapfrog. There we go, leapfrog thing. If I do that 18 times even, I'm going to be over a ½ inch off. All right, now here's my last gap. If I put this here, I'm pretty close. I'm pleased with that. Okay, if you're off a 1/16 of an inch, nobody's going to cry so long as that's no more than 4 inches. Okay, so to review what we did, step one is we eliminated one gap. That allowed us to deal with gap balusters together. Okay, this is one unit, a gap and a baluster. You can't do that if you don't take off this at the end. Otherwise what happens, that's not what I wanted. Otherwise what happens is you end with a gap baluster at the end, and that's no good. Okay, so you eliminate one, then you divide by the number of gap baluster, which is, the maximum is 5 1/4. Okay, so divide the total, 92, after you eliminate that, is 92. Divide that by 5 1/2 or 5 1/4, and that can change depending on what your spindles are, or your balusters. If you have a spindle type baluster and it's only 3/4 of an inch round, then obviously that dimension changes. Step 3, subtract the balusters from the total run. So your total balusters, if you add up every baluster all the way down, which is 18, take those off the total, that leaves you with one mammoth gap. Then you take that mammoth gap and you divide it by the number of gaps you have in total, which is always one more gap than balusters. All right, hopefully that made sense. Hey, look, the birds are Twitter pages. It's springtime and the birds know it. So I also want to, if you have any questions, definitely let me know. Hit me up on the Google Classroom or whatnot. And then I also want you guys to tell me what you think of my chicken coop. All right, so this thing is basically finally done. Pretty excited about it. I know, get excited about some pretty boring stuff. I drilled this hole so we can run this rod right through here and shut the door. All right, shut the door, shut the door. There we go. And then look at that. I don't think the foxes are getting in the hen house there. Pretty sweet, pretty sweet.